Performative equity, the illusion of justice in the language of inclusion. 1. Nature of performative equity. Performative equity refers to symbolic gestures, surface-level reforms, or public-facing commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion that lack structural depth, transformative intent, or ethical accountability. It is the practice of enacting equity rhetorically or cosmetically, often to protect institutional image, appease regulatory demands, or respond to social pressure without disrupting the deeper systems of power, exclusion, or privilege. Performative equity is equity without justice, diversity without disruption, and inclusion without redistribution. The term critiques the rise of equity theater in education and institutional culture, where performative language, decolonization, transformation, belonging, Ubuntu, social justice is adopted in strategy documents, speeches, branding, or project funding applications, but decoupled from real change. 2. Processes that sustain performative equity. Performative equity follows predictable patterns. It often emerges when institutions feel compelled to respond to calls for justice, but fear the discomfort, risk, or power shifts required for authentic transformation. Key processes include tokenism, appointing a few individuals from marginalized backgrounds into visible roles to give the appearance of diversity without changing structures. These individuals are often isolated, unsupported, and expected to represent their entire group. Box-ticking and compliance culture, framing transformation as a technical exercise achieved through numeric targets, policy compliance, or generic workshops, rather than as ethical and political work. Equity becomes a formality, not a moral imperative. Strategic silence, avoiding difficult truths about racism, patriarchy, ableism, or epistemic violence in curriculum and leadership, while performing respectful conversations or vague inclusivity discourses. Co-option of radical language. Institutions adopt the vocabulary of resistance, decolonization, anti-racism, intersectionality, while stripping it of its critical edge and embedding it in bureaucratic language. Public posturing, issuing transformation statements, diversity awards, and inclusive excellence campaigns, often in response to scandals or protests without follow-through. Equity is commodified to improve brand reputation. 3. Consequences of performative equity. The consequences are far-reaching and corrosive, particularly for those who are most affected by historical and ongoing injustice. Disillusionment and burnout. Marginalized students and staff often feel used or sidelined, expected to share their stories without meaningful redress. Scholars of color, women, disabled, and queer academics experience equity fatigue, eroded trust, and alienation. Reinforcement of status quo. By creating the appearance of transformation, performative equity protects the status quo, making it harder to justify deeper reforms. Those in power claim progress has been made, reducing urgency, silencing of radical voices. Critical educators and researchers may be disciplined, ignored, or labeled disruptive for challenging surface reforms. Institutions use civility and tone policing to manage dissent. Erosion of public trust. Communities, students, and stakeholders lose faith in the sincerity of institutional transformation claims. Transformation becomes a brand, not a lived experience. Co-optation of social movements. Institutional power absorbs and neutralizes grassroots movements by performing symbolic support, Black Lives Matter statements without material or epistemic accountability. 4. Relevance in transformative education. In transformative education, performative equity is an ever-present risk. It undermines the purpose of teaching for liberation and the struggle for just, inclusive futures. Curriculum. Diverse readings may be added without changing epistemological frameworks, power dynamics, or assessment practices. Decolonization becomes a buzzword, not a reworlding. Pedagogy. Educators may adopt inclusive language, but avoid difficult conversations about white supremacy, classism, settler colonialism, or ableism. Safe learning is mistaken for transformative learning. Leadership. Diversity portfolios or equity roles may be created without decision-making power, proper resourcing, or structural mandates. Transformation becomes the responsibility of the oppressed, not of the system. 5. Applicability in social justice research. In critical and social justice-oriented research, performative equity invites both methodological scrutiny and ethical reflection. Questioning research motives. Are equity-focused projects designed to tick funding boxes or to serve the actual needs of communities? Who decides what counts as equity? Representation versus redistribution. Is the research amplifying marginal voices only in data or also in authorship, leadership, and benefit sharing? Knowledge justice. Are non-Western, indigenous, or feminist knowledges being respected or merely cited to appear inclusive? Reflexivity. Researchers must confront their own privileges, funding dependencies, and institutional entanglements. Critical reflexivity becomes a tool to resist performativity in scholarly practice. 6. From performative equity to transformative praxis. Moving beyond performance requires courageous and collective action rooted in disruptive honesty, naming discomfort, confronting resistance, and telling the truth about what is not working. Structural commitment. Reallocating resources, shifting institutional power, changing hiring, promotion, and curriculum at foundational levels. Epistemic reimagination. Not just adding voices, but changing the rules of what counts as knowledge. Embracing indigenous, African, feminist, and Black epistemologies not as supplements, but as alternatives. Community accountability. Equity efforts must be accountable to those most affected, not only institutional leadership or funders. 7. Conclusion. The mirror or the mask. Performative equity wears a mask of inclusion, but shields the mirror of truth. In the critical paradigm, the task is not merely to unveil this mask, but to refuse its logic and to replace it with authentic, ethical, and collective commitments to justice. In a world flooded with diversity talk but transformation delay, performative equity must be exposed for what it is, a detour from liberation, not a step toward it. As Audre Lorde reminds us, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Happy learning.